the Water Department has identified communities needing water tanks for basic hygiene to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. But water activists say not all communities have actually received them. Corruption and mismanagement of the water infrastructure has been blamed for this lack of water in communities. The South African Food Sovereignty Campaign has been monitoring the provision of water, and it's found 79 distressed communities, and they are mainly in the Eastern Cape, that still do not have an adequate supply of water. Let's unpack this story now. We're joined by an activist with that campaign, Professor Vishwas Satgar. Thanks very much, Professor, for your time this morning. I mean, this is just a staggering indictment on the Department of Water and Sanitation, but especially at a time when water is so essential to the ongoing life and health of people in the country.
Absolutely. Communities and households are at an absolute disadvantage if they do not have access to water in the context of COVID-19. We went into this pandemic situation and lockdown with 54% of households not having access to clean water through a tap in South Africa. Also think about a reality in particularly informal settlements where people have to access water through communal taps and things like that. We also not clear how the minister developed a methodology to target communities. She announced very early on before lockdown that 2,000 communities were prioritized. And how that was worked out, how that list was worked out is not clear. But what is apparent is that South Africa's drought is still with us. And that is why the Eastern Cape registers so prominently in the self-reporting tool we've developed on our webpage. Many of those communities are really in a distressed state. If you look at some of the parts of the Eastern Cape, like in the Karoo, many of those towns are reliant on borehole water right now. Many of those aquifers are at almost zero. And so what we are picking up is that the minister's intervention, while well-intentioned, while good, is not really dealing with where the crisis is really unfolding right now. Some of those aquifers need to be recharged. That's one of the demands that has come out from our survey or self-reporting tool that we've done. We're also finding that histories of maladministration, corruption, etc. are also preventing water access. The minister has called for local governments to be a bit more lenient. But again, many communities are not sure when water supply is switched on, when it is switched off, and that's coming through as well in our reporting. Yeah. We also have situations in rural communities where borehole infrastructure, which should have been fixed during South Africa's drought, has not been fixed. And many of those communities are in a compromised situation.
And this is one of the things that we've been discussing throughout our coverage of the pandemic, the fact that what COVID-19 has done is it's highlighted things that already exist within the country, issues like unemployment and certainly like a lack of access to water. I mean, according to residents in at least some of these districts, they've had tap water for about 2 days a week on average for years. That was up until 2015, and then the taps went completely dry. And that is just from one community.
Absolutely. So this is the kind of impunity, uncaring leadership that's there. But, you know, this is a problem that has built up over time. Last year in November, the new minister, Minister Sisulu, announced a master plan for water infrastructure, water rollout in the country. The price tag to that is almost 900 billion. Now, this is indicative that for almost 2.5 decades, South Africa has not taken the water crisis seriously across the country. And we are heading for a disastrous situation. So we've got COVID-19 on the one hand, which requires us to ensure water access for our citizens. On the other hand, we have a country that is heading to become more drier and hotter in the context of climate change. And this also means that water is going to be an important need. It's going to be a source of conflict if we do not deal with these issues. So the minister has nationalized effectively control of water resources in South Africa. She's bypassed water boards, associations, and so on. So she is in the driving seat. She has immense power, but 20,000 water tanks is not enough. There's a lot more that has to be done on the ground right now to ensure that everybody's water secure in South Africa.
And those water tanks, that's one issue, but once they go dry, we're told they're either not replenished or they take a long time to be replenished.
Exactly. Many of the communities on the ground, and we are in touch with them, do not know what the top-up program is from government. When will tankers come back to replenish water, and so on. So there's a lot of confusion. So symbolically, it looks like the minister is responding to needs, but this is not being done in a sustainable way. Many communities are also falling through the cracks, as I've been saying. The need is great. The scale of the problem is big. Local governments are really centrally implicated in the crisis on the ground. And of course, this again shows us that this is a multifaceted problem. The water minister can do what she can, but she's going to have to do much more together with her colleagues in cabinet to address the deepening and worsening water crisis in the country. But we have an opportunity right now.
Yeah, Professor, in the meantime, apologies for interrupting you there, 900 billion rand set aside for water infrastructure in the country. I mean, that just puts off alarm bells in your mind immediately, just in terms of the ability for corruption to take place in a sector like that. The Department of Water and Sanitation already, between sort of 2012, 2019, a number of reported cases of corruption investigated. Some people were suspended, others were found guilty, etc., etc. But none of the money, as far as I can see, recouped. The millions of rands that were lost due to wasteful and unauthorized expenditure in those financial years, none of those money gotten back to taxpayers.
No, exactly. And the corruption is systemic. It's deep. And this department reveals that in very appropriate ways, actually. You can see it. I mean, some of the corruption has been at a very high level in terms of the management strata in the department. But the corruption is so bad that, you know, you have communities. So if you take Makhanda, for example, in the Eastern Cape, there has been a release of resources since around 2010. There's been multiple attempts to resource problem solving. Up to now, right now, in the midst of COVID-19, the minister had to suspend the CEO, if you like, of that area, of that region, again, related to maladministration, corruption, and so on. So the problem is really deep. It's widespread. There are many, many examples of this that we've picked up in the mapping tool. There's many places in the country. So the corruption issue is taking away from meeting needs of the people. The minister has shown political will, but the rot is deep, and there's going to have to be a big push to really make officials accountable, focus them on the work, and also get money back. I think that's the fundamental issue. Yeah. We'd like to see some orange overalls coming out of this moment also, people going to jail.
Yeah, it's not the only sector where we'd like to see that unfolding. So now we're in this state of a pandemic. As South Africa, we're trying to do what we can to keep our infections down. The lack of a proper provision of water does nothing to help that effort. So now that we know we don't have the time to fix the issues of water infrastructure, what happens now?
I really do think that we have to be respectful of how communities are dealing with these problems. In the early stages of Lockdown 5, a community in the Eastern Cape in the Santana region, their activists, their villages have been meeting regularly to try and solve these problems collectively. They were criminalized, they were charged, they were taken to court. We made a call together with others that charges should be lifted because these communities have been outside of government's purview for a long time. Their needs are not being met, and they have developed self-provisioning systems. Fortunately, the court was lenient and the charges were lifted. So this is an example of where communities, in the context of this very difficult situation, are trying to hold it together. So you're going to see a lot of that in the context of this crisis. And the way government is regulating, the way government is managing the situation, there has to be understanding, there has to be flexibility. At the same time, I think the minister has an important opportunity to ensure some level of planning and democratic planning, listening to communities right now, having a needs-based approach to the situation. South Africa is not resource constrained within its current budget. She can do a lot right now. We are going into a situation where schools are going to be opening up. The minister did say that water infrastructure in schools could be used for provisioning. In our monitoring, we have not seen that kick into place. There are complexities around this, but if this is done in a way that is participatory, that involves communities in some areas, water can be made accessible. We would also like to see not just 20,000 water tanks hitting the ground. The need is great. There has to be a willingness to think more broadly around that issue. We might need more water tanks. We might want to see a programming schedule on how this is rolled out. We also want to see an attempt to fix some very basic problems. We mentioned boreholes. In some communities, boreholes need to be recharged. They need to be fixed. We need to see local government being much more responsive. And I think this is where an alignment with COCTA becomes absolutely necessary, so that local government is also, if you like, placed in the spotlight, given the responsibility, and the leadership has to step up. I think finally what's important in all of this is that we've given the minister a demand that by today, she and her advisors need to give us a comprehensive response. We have a constitutional right to have people's needs met. We're hoping the minister takes these reports very seriously. If she does not, we are going to be forced to take legal action and draw attention to the rights that citizens have in the Constitution and within our water legislation. Water in South Africa is a public good, and this means that everybody has a right to share in our water commons. Currently in South Africa, 62% of our water resources sit on plus or minus 5,000 private dams. These dams are there for industrial agriculture. We cannot be in a situation where these resources are not used in a way that balance needs right now. So there's a whole set of things that can be done in the immediate moment to ensure water needs are met, our Constitution is affirmed, the needs and rights of citizens are also met.
Yeah, and criminalizing those who are fighting for the provision of clean water does nothing for that fight. Professor, thanks very much for your time. Professor Vishwas Satgar is the co-founder of the SA Food Sovereignty Campaign.